So fasting occurs anytime we abstain from eating or drinking anything with caloric significance. We actually practice fasting every day when we go to sleep. So unless you're that person that gets up for that midnight snack, most people don't eat again until breakfast. And actually, the action is in the word. Breakfast, you're breaking your fast. Now, intermittent fasting is going beyond that, where you delay your eating even further in order to extend that fasting period. For humans, prolonged fasting has been rooted in cultural and spiritual significance for eons. But today, you'll find that intermittent fasting is actually quite a trendy way to lose weight. You might have heard some of these, the 16-8, where you eat in an 8-hour window, or the 5-2, where you reduce your caloric intake for 2 days out of the week. Whatever the program though, the idea is still the same. You're trying to extend that fasting period. As time goes on though, research shows us that there might be some other benefits to intermittent fasting. There's good evidence that this type of feeding regime can reduce your blood glucose and insulin levels during the fasting period, decrease markers of inflammation, and improve cardiac and neuronal function following injury. We have to keep in mind though that most of this research has been performed in both humans and in rodent models, so it's difficult to extrapolate that to dogs and cats. In dogs though, much less is known when it comes to research. Now this area I've always been particularly interested about because A, we know so little, and B, because I think this is a species that actually could be really well adapted to this type of feeding regime. Now we know domestic dogs are far from the wolves that they used to be, but it's really interesting to think about how different the feeding behaviors are. Wolves bring down a large prey and eat that every 2 or 3 days. In contrast, on average, most dogs are fed twice a day. So it's really interesting to think about whether dogs are still adaptable to a fasting feeding type of regime and whether they could also benefit from it. There are a few studies that have looked at the effect of food restriction in dogs, and they have shown that it does relate to a lower incidence of disease development, increased lifespan, and improved performance. Also, a recent study from the Dog Aging Project also reported that dogs that were fed once a day, as reported by their owners, had reduced associations with certain types of diseases. However, with all of these studies, it's hard to decouple the effects of intermittent fasting from caloric restriction. You end up eating less calories when you're on an intermittent fasting regime. That's why it's such a good weight loss program. So it's hard to know in this research what is actually having the effect. Intermittent fasting itself, or is it the fact that the dogs lose a bit of weight? It's also really not easy to avoid losing weight in these studies. I know from personal experience, when we were running these studies, we tried to maintain the dogs on the same weights, but it was really difficult. And actually feeding a high-fat diet during intermittent fasting was needed in order to reduce the weight loss that we saw. There also can be some other downsides to fasting, such as muscle loss and a reduced thirst drive when you eat less meals. And that could lead to dehydration if you're not careful. There's also a concern about the effects of fasting on immune suppression, but we actually didn't see that in the dogs when we fasted them for up to 48 hours. However, if you are interested in this type of feeding regime in your dog and they are healthy, evidence suggests that you could go down to a 1-a-day feeding, and that could have some benefits in monitoring how much calories they consume and maintaining an ideal weight. There are definitely some cases where intermittent fasting, though, is not appropriate for dogs. These include those that are sick, where you're having issues maintaining their weight or they're losing muscle mass. We're also thinking about senior animals where maintaining muscle mass is particularly important. Also, in some cases, dogs can have some vomiting if they have an empty stomach for too long. So those are some things to be mindful of. And of course, we don't recommend this type of feeding regime for puppies. So intermittent fasting remains a really interesting area of research, not only for us, but also our 4-legged companions. I'm looking at you cats. We know so little about you guys in this area. It's an interesting area that's constantly evolving, and we'll keep you updated as the science gets there. So thanks guys. For more detailed information about intermittent fasting, please check out our blog. I'll post a link below for you. And also, if you found this content interesting and you would like to support us, please subscribe. And we'll see you soon.